Good afternoon and welcome to the Faster Payments Call for September 15th. I'm Jean Rourke with the Federal Reserve and I'll be your facilitator. Today, we'll look at what's happening with the Faster Payments Task Force. But first, let's jump to slide 2 to talk about the logistics of the call. This call is being recorded and will be made available at fedpaymentsimprovement.org in the coming days. If you haven't done so yet, click on the webinar link you received when registering. This option offers a few benefits. You can watch the slides as they're advanced. You can type questions directly to us. You can download the session materials, or you can even choose to listen to the audio through your PC speakers. I would like to note that the webinar performance does depend on your connection, so if at any time you're having problems, just pick up the phone and dial the toll-free number. Now let me thank our presenter today, Connie Theien. Connie is Vice President from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. As I mentioned earlier, you can submit questions to us at any time by clicking the Ask Question button in the webinar tool. Let's get started with a quick polling question. So grab your mouse and respond, please. I'm going to take you to the polling question, and you should be able to see that question pop up on your screen. And I'll read that aloud for our participants. Please choose the option that best describes your organization. Are you a financial institution, an end user, which might be a merchant, government, or consumer interest organization? Are you a non-bank provider, which might be a service provider, a technology provider, or network operator? Or other, which might be academic, consultant, or a regulator? I'll give you a second to think about that. If you haven't joined us in the webinar, we'd love to have you join, and you can respond to our polling questions. Give you one more second, and I will stop that poll and show the results to the group. And wait for just a second to see those results. Wait one more second to see those results. Okay, and it looks like 58% of your participants are from financial institutions. And Connie, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jean. And good afternoon. Good morning to our participants on the West Coast. We are thrilled that you've all made the time to join us today and learn what's happening with the Faster Payments Task Force. As Jean noted, I'm Connie Sine. I'm the Vice President of Payments Industry Relations for the Federal Reserve System. And my responsibility is to engage payment stakeholders like you in the important payment system improvement work that's underway. So very much appreciate you joining us today. I hope this is valuable and you'll learn about additional opportunities to stay involved with us. On the call today, I'm going to first give you some background and context, describe the strategies for improving the U.S. payment system paper that was released by the Federal Reserve earlier this year. And then we're going to move into talking about one of the strategies articulated in that paper that focuses on faster payments. We'll talk about the Faster Payments Task Force that we've established and the mission and objectives of that group. And then I'll give you an overview of the work to be undertaken by the task force over the next 18 months. Last but not least, I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to highlight for you ongoing opportunities for you to stay engaged, to track this work, and even to participate in the Faster Payments Initiative. Let's move on to slide 5. And I'll give you a little bit of background. As I noted, many of you may be familiar with this. If you participate in industry conferences, trade organizations, associations, we've worked hard over the past 9 months to create awareness of our strategies paper that was released in January. For those of you who perhaps aren't as familiar with it, the strategies for improving the U.S. payment system paper articulates desired outcomes for the U.S. payment system. And they are focused on enhancing the speed, security, and efficiency of the U.S. payment system as it relates both to domestic and cross-border payments. and it describes an outcome that focuses on achieving those enhancements through collaboration with all payment stakeholders. The paper describes the desired outcomes, but more importantly, it outlines a number of strategies that we are pursuing in partnership with industry stakeholders to achieve those desired outcomes. First and foremost, as a foundation to all of the work, we're establishing forums, opportunities, task forces, work groups, mechanisms that will facilitate the collaboration needed to develop solutions to the pain points, to pursue the opportunities that we've identified. Strategies 2 through 5 focus on development, implementation, and adoption of solutions that enhance speed, security, and efficiency. Today, we're going to talk at length about the faster payment strategy, but I wanted to take a moment to highlight a few of the other initiatives underway as well, so that you have the opportunity outside of this call to perhaps explore more information on those opportunities. The third strategy, number 3, focuses on the safety and security of the payment system, specifically how we as an industry can reduce fraud risk and ensure the safety, stability, resiliency of the payment system. You may have heard about the Secure Payments Task Force, which is a group that's been established to support this particular strategy. In addition to that, the Federal Reserve has a number of work efforts underway that focus on standards, research, and education that we believe will further enhancements to payment security. Strategy number 4 focuses on efficiency, and that, in a nutshell, is about end-to-end electronification straight through processing. So it's about driving the remaining paper out of the system. It's about addressing some of the challenges related to straight through processing, remittance data, supporting the needs of B2B payments, and cross-border payments. The initiatives underway in this area focus on a few key issues. One, adoption, a strategy for implementing ISO 20022 in the U.S. for wire transfer and automated clearinghouse payments. 2, there is work underway to look at how directories could enhance efficiency and end-to-end processing of payments. And 3, there's a very big focus on electronification of B2B payments. If you're familiar with the retail payment study that the Federal Reserve conducts every few years, you might recall that the last study report issued noted that there remained 18 billion check payments annually in the U.S. A very large percentage of those are business payments. And so there's a lot of work underway by the Federal Reserve and in partnership with an industry organization called the Remittance Coalition to identify the barriers, the obstacles to electronification of B2B payments and to address those barriers. The last strategy discussed in the paper focuses on how we, the Federal Reserve, can enhance the services, the payment services we provide to financial institutions to further achieve the desired outcome. And so looking at for our funds transfer, automated clearinghouse, settlement services, and check services as well, how we can develop enhanced risk management service, how we can speed settlement of payments on all of those rails, provide richer information, really support all of the speed, security, and efficiency objectives. So that is the strategies for improving the U.S. payment system paper in a nutshell. As I noted today, we are going to focus our discussion on faster payments. So If you move on to slide 6, we've outlined succinctly some of the key drivers that led us to conclude this need for faster payments that many folks would describe as a need for real-time payments in the United States. Before I kind of, dive into the research and the rationale that we articulate in the paper, I'll just share a very recent and personal story that lots of you can probably relate to. In the course of my industry relations job, you can imagine I travel a lot to speak to groups and attend conferences and meet with payments organizations all across the United States. And so it's a regular occurrence that I am submitting expense statements. And that process, even in its smoothest iteration, can be painful here and there. And recently I had a new experience with our staff at the Fed, who you can imagine here were very rigorous and disciplined in reviewing expenses in the guidelines for all of our expenses. And we have great staff at the Chicago Fed who help us with that and review everything. And with my most recent expense statement, I got a question back from our staff that said, Connie, this taxi that you took on Wednesday, the receipt you turned in from your bank statement shows it settling at your bank the following Tuesday. Are you sure you have the right receipt for your Wednesday taxi? And I replied back to her saying, we're working on the speed of the payment system, but yeah, it really is. It's hard to believe, but the taxi driver took out his metal thingy and put a carbon copy paper in, and it probably took 3 days for that to get to his taxi company and process it, and then the credit card stuff wasn't processed over the weekend. And so, yeah, that Tuesday receipt on my bank account really is for the payment that was a week before. I said, give us a couple of years, and we'll try and, move that up at least a few days. So I'm guessing that all of you in business and personal context have stories like that even our electronic payments, our fastest mechanisms today, are slow. We have, as noted on this slide, lots of innovation going on in the payment system. We can certainly all, and many of you may have services that you use that deliver a real-time experience or mimic a real-time experience with payments. I think what we've noted in our research leading up to the paper is that there's a real lack of coordination and fragmentation as it relates to all of that innovation that's happening. And so there are announcements every day about real-time payments, but I still experience regularly this issue of asking someone if I can send them a payment using my service, and they respond back that, oh, I don't use that service, I use this service. And I don't really want to sign up for your service or have, 18 different apps just to be able to pay my friends for a baby shower gift. So a lot of fragmentation. There's also a lot of discussion in the industry and concern about the fact that the U.S. is at risk of falling behind. You hear different numbers. I think the latest I heard was roughly 34 countries across the globe that either have or are in process of developing real-time payment systems. We're certainly actively discussing this in the U.S., but perhaps on the tail end of that curve. And I think we'll talk about the task force work later, but one of the things I hear from task force members is it isn't just about, a reputational issue or, a pride issue that we should worry about being behind. They talk about the problem with us being in a position where perhaps we're forced to follow other countries and our freedom to decide and design a system that is ideally suited, tailored to our needs, is more constrained if we are a latecomer to the real-time payments environment. why faster payments? There's also really clear momentum and demand in the marketplace. I talked about all the systems that are out there, and there is uptake on lots of the systems evolving in the marketplace, the service offerings. We also, as part of our research prior to publishing our paper, did end-user research, talked to consumers and businesses, small and large. And, a couple of key takeaways from all of that research included, folks saying largely, in the 75% range, responding that they would prefer payments to be processed with either instantly or within 1 hour. And even more importantly, I guess, if you're a provider in the marketplace, a third of consumers and 2/3 of businesses said they would be willing to pay some fee for that level of service. So I think what we're observing in the marketplace, what we've seen in some of our research, indicates that there really is clear momentum and demand around faster payments. And last, an important thing that we heard through our consultation paper soliciting feedback is industry-wide concern from all stakeholders about how the financial services industry can better serve the needs of the unbanked and underbanked. And one of the clear needs in that sector is the ability to manage money in real time balances, real-time movement of money, real-time payments. And so we think while this doesn't is not the silver bullet to solve all of the needs of that population, it could be an important contribution to better serving those needs. So that's the why, some of the things that prompted this to be a priority and a critical focus of our payments improvement strategy. So before I dive into the task force, we're going to stop and sort of get an understanding of where you're at on your knowledge of the Faster Payments Task Force. So let me turn it over to Jean.
All right, thank you, Connie. And let me push that or launch that polling question for the group. And that should pop up on your screen if you've joined us in the webinar, and I will read that aloud for you. Prior to this webinar, how informed were you about the Faster Payments Task Force and the work currently underway? And your options are: not at all. You are learning about this initiative for the first time. Slightly. You've heard about the initiative at a high level, but aren't up to date on task force work underway. Moderately. You have read some of the task force materials and have a general understanding of the work underway. Or very. You've read task force materials, discussed the work with others, and feel fairly knowledgeable about the work underway. All right, so I will give you just a second to respond to that polling question. And I'm going to just stall for a second, and I'll stop that poll and show the results. And hopefully, Connie, you have seen those results come up on your screen. And, it looks like slightly and moderately are very close. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Jean. That's interesting. I was wondering if we should have had a follow-on polling question that said, how many folks on the call are members of the task force? I didn't expect for the audience to be as knowledgeable as you are. So hopefully you'll walk away with some new information. We're going to dive into some things that we haven't communicated widely yet, and you'll have a chance to learn more today. On slide 8, here we describe the strategy number 2, the Faster Payment Strategy in the paper, as well as the mission and objectives of the Faster Payments Task Force. The strategy in the paper is really straightforward. It is to identify effective approaches for implementing a safe, ubiquitous, faster payments capability in the United States. We'll get into sort of the one aspect of this work that's about identifying the criteria for a faster payment system, but the paper in a very succinct way articulates at the highest level those requirements, that it's got to be safe, it has to be ubiquitous, so broadly available to consumer and business end users in the U.S. And it has to be faster. And that's something that, in all of our discussions over the last couple of years, there's lots of debate about how you define faster and real time and near real time and what actually do we need. And so the work of the Faster Payments Task Force is to do just that. It's to not only identify potential approaches to faster payments, but to evaluate them in order to make an assessment as to what would be effective. And our hope is that the work of this task force will really generate some momentum in the industry down a path toward implementing and adopting capabilities. The objectives of the task force, we really intentionally solicited very diverse participation so that we would have stakeholders around the table who could represent the views from different seats in the payment system as to what the needs are for a faster payments capability. That's really the foundation and the building block of trying to identify what would be effective. The task force certainly is charged with assessing alternative approaches. And then, beyond that, what do we need? What are the options? It's sort of looking at, are there strategic issues that need to be addressed to enable successful implementation, perhaps even regardless of what approaches are identified. And so really thinking beyond just this is the solution, but what would the industry need to do to get there and achieve ubiquitous access and adoption. So moving on to slide 9. As we structured this initiative, we wanted the opportunity for stakeholders who were committed and had the time, resources, and interest available to be at the table to participate in the task force as a member to help identify these alternatives and assess these alternatives. We also wanted the opportunity for folks who were not interested in that level of commitment or unable to commit at that level to still follow, to weigh in, to provide input. And so on slide 9, you can see we describe this structure that has the community, which all of you, whether you're formally registered or not, we think about you as being in the stakeholder community, and your views are important to this process. So we've created opportunities like today and many more to come where you can stay up to date and provide input on what's happening with the task force work. If you're a member of the Faster Payments Task Force, and I should say there are still opportunities for you to participate or join. You can get details on that online at fedpaymentsimprovement.org under Get Involved. But if you're part of the task force, you are charged with doing the work that I described, and I'll describe in more detail in a moment. We have folks who have been elected from that task force body to serve on a steering committee. And the steering committee is 19 representatives representing different segments of the stakeholder universe and the task force membership who advise the Fed, really help to guide the work, develop the work plans, assist with engaging members and gathering input from different segment perspectives, and managing the work to successful completion. And then as the work goes forward, we envision the task force really chartering work groups to focus on specific issues, and in the context of this faster payments work, probably 2 work groups to identify those potential approaches for assessment. An important thing to note, I mentioned earlier when I talked about strategy 3, payment security, that we've established a secure payments task force. That task force is chartered with advising the Faster Payments Task Force to ensure that the recommendations that come out of this body describe a faster payments capability that is also secure. So they play an important role in helping to identify the security-related requirements and then likely down the road during this assessment process, weighing in on the approaches from a security perspective. At the bottom, I'll note that we do have, if you're curious to see whether colleagues, representatives from trade associations that you belong to, other groups are on the task force, we have links at the bottom of this slide where you can see the full Faster Payments Task Force roster, as well as the steering committee roster, which we've actually provided for your reference in the presentation today as well. So moving on, slide 10, Faster Payments Task Force composition. I indicated that it was a very high priority to us that the task force had representation from every sector of the industry and stakeholder community. And we feel really good about the membership as it stands today. We've got 320 plus total registered members, and you can see that it's spread really pretty evenly across the different sectors of the industry. If you break this down into even simpler categories, it's almost 1/3 financial institutions, 1/3 end users, and 1/3 service providers of some sort. So a very nice balance and really good, healthy dialogue and a lot of learning and sharing. And we're in this early phase where a lot of sort of work to understand different perspectives and priorities and needs. So really pleased with the membership. On slide 11, here you can see the steering committee roster for the Faster Payments Task Force. I noted that the steering committee was selected through an election process by which members of the task force in each of these categories we outline here put themselves forward as a candidate for the steering committee, and there was an election where each of the segments elected their own representatives. We, as the Fed, appointed a few members just to round out and ensure we had kind of all of the important views at the steering committee table. So let's move on and talk about the work of the task force. On slide 12, we outline the work plan at a high level, and we're approaching this work in 3 phases. The first phase, which began when we actually officially kicked off the task force on April 29th, had a 2-day in-person meeting in June where we dug into the work in full force, and that was the beginning of phase 1. And the focus here is really, planning the work. It's development of the process we're going to use for identifying approaches and evaluating approaches. So I'm going to talk in a few minutes about a couple of the really key deliverables coming out of phase 1, as well as opportunities for you to provide input on those. Phase 2 is kind of the doing the work. It's that assessment process. So it's development of approaches, solution proposals. So this is where we envision work groups that will really articulate in a lot of detail a potential approach, what it looks like, all of the aspects of it, infrastructure and economics and rules and governance and capabilities, and put that forward for assessment. Those will be assessed kind of according to those criteria that we developed in phase 1, and phase 3 will be where we share with the broader industry, with stakeholders, the results of the task force's work, their assessment, their recommendations, as well as the issues that they've identified as critical to successful implementation and adoption. That's at a high level. We're going to dig into phase 1 key deliverables on slide 13. I'm going to speak today about kind of three key things that are underway and coming out of phase one. The first is the decision-making framework. It was important out of the gate for the task force to decide and agree to how are we going to make decisions. You know, when we produce criteria, how are we going to issue something that we can say with confidence this is a product of the task force and has the broad support of the task force membership? So that was job one. The second is designing, developing effectiveness criteria. So it's really a process to say what's important to us, the collective us, in a faster payment system. Essentially, what are our requirements? What do we need and want out of faster payments capability? So that's the effectiveness criteria. And then third, the proposal assessment architecture. This is kind of, you know, a fancy term to describe how are we going to develop and assess proposals? What's the whole process going to look like? What are the guidelines? What should a proposal look like? You know, what's the template for a proposal? How will work groups bring that forward? Who's qualified to, you know, form a work group? Once we have proposals, who will do the evaluation? How will they be assessed? How will we come to, you know, task force consensus around the assessment? So that is the proposal assessment architecture that's in development now. A little more detail around the decision-making framework on slide 14. As I noted, this framework describes how the task force will make decisions and develop and approve work products. It was important, as I noted, to the task force that any work product decision coming out of the group had broad support of stakeholders on the task force. So it needed to consider and, you know, largely meet the needs of end users and providers and financial institutions, networks, consumers, businesses, all of those. And so the task force designed a structure that says, yes, we want a supermajority of the entire task force. So it just, in its simplest form, this has to be most task force members support this and agree to this. But there's really a second layer that they determined was important to, in order for us to confidently say we had consensus. And that was that there are 8 segments aligning roughly around what you saw on the steering committee page. And that we'd like to be able to say that 7 of 8 segments supported this. So it had majority support in 7 of 8 segments, which means, you know, it's really a win for, you know, virtually all stakeholders in the system. So that's the structure that was designed and approved by the task force using the decision-making framework model on September 3rd, and that will guide how decisions are made moving forward. The second deliverable in phase 1 that I noted is on slide 15, and I'm going to describe this in a bit more detail on the next few slides, and I'm also going to talk about an opportunity for you to dive really deep into the faster payments effectiveness criteria after today's call. So first, what are the faster payments effectiveness criteria? It's really, you know, we started out of the gate with thinking about this as the criteria that would be used to evaluate alternative approaches to faster payments in this task force process. And clearly, they are that. This will be a framework that the task force will use to, you know, measure these possible different approaches and say, you know, from all of these, against all of these various criteria, they're more effective, less effective, and to come to their conclusions about what would effective approaches be. But it's really more than that, and I think this was a really big piece of feedback out of the gate that we heard across the task force membership and very strongly from the steering committee, is that these criteria will have really significant value to the industry, independent of anything that happens with them in the task force, completely independent of the task force process. The industry, the market, all of the organizations innovating in payments will find value in these in helping to guide their innovation and helping to guide their product development, because these effectiveness criteria will really articulate stakeholder needs, and they'll reflect a broad consensus of a large group of 300 diverse stakeholders about what this country needs in a faster payment capability. And so we've had lots of folks on the task force say, if we stop the process after this whole effort will have been worthwhile because of the value of these criteria to the industry. So it's important to understand the dual purpose and value that these will serve. And because of that importance, we're really doing things like this webinar, like Friday's webinar, to get a greater understanding across the industry about what we're doing here and to give you the opportunity to comment. So let me explain a little bit more tactically what these criteria are. On slide 16, we outline the structure of the criteria as it exists in its current draft. So there are 36 criteria. I think there may even be some subdivision in process, so we might even have more than this at the end of the process. But they're divided into these 6 categories that at a high level describe, the areas of requirements. Ubiquity gets at, that goal that the capability is broadly accessible to consumers and businesses in the U.S. So it talks about accessibility, how will service providers and people that provide payment services to end users access the system. It considers end user requirements for usability and predictability and data. What kind of information do consumers or businesses need to travel with their payment? It talks about, cross-border. If you think about ubiquity, cross-border payments are becoming more and more prevalent, even at the consumer level. And so to what extent can it meet the needs of that particular use case and other use cases? What use cases are most important? Is the more the better? How would we determine the need and the effectiveness of any capability as it relates to use cases? Speed is certainly a category, and it's speed of every aspect of the payments and process, so authorization, clearing, availability, settlement, and speed of the payment transaction, but also the information surrounding it, the status of that, and the data associated with it, so visibility of the whole process to the end user. Efficiency is an important category and a broad category that captures competition, which can drive efficiency of process and other aspects of payments. It talks about, it gives an opportunity to assess the cost effectiveness of any capability, the implementation timeline, and allows folks to consider, stakeholders to consider the trade-offs of some of those. It speaks to standards, formats, more broadly, interoperability. Would the capability be positioned to drive interoperability, which ties back as well to ubiquity? And then, is it future-proof? Is it scalable, adaptable? Would we be well-positioned as needs evolve and change over time? And then, in the efficiency category, thinking about lots of our pain points today, how would the capability or the particular approach support and handle exceptions and investigations, and how efficient is the system in managing that aspect of the payments process? Governance, really important category, short list here, but really critical and important to people. And the criteria really try to articulate the values of effective, transparent, and inclusive governance. And lots of discussion and debate going on to try and really define those well. The legal framework for payments, another really critical aspect. So looking at, do proposed approaches leverage existing legal frameworks? Where would there be requirements or considerations for changes to legal frameworks? How would it treat kind of proprietary technology? So legal, an important area. This is an example of an area where, as the task force has been working through this, they said, this area would really benefit from some focus by real subject matter experts. So the task force has stood up a working group specifically to look at the legal criteria for faster payments. And then last, but clearly, as you can see here, not least, safety and security as a category. The largest category, and this really covers the gamut of, risk mitigation and management, fraud prevention, monitoring, compliance issues, technical security, things like authentication and enrollment. It also gets into data protection, a really critical security issue for folks today, and so looks at end user privacy and resiliency, data protection criteria around those things. So a really comprehensive, robust list of criteria, as you can see, and potentially this list may even grow a little bit. Slide 17 gives you an example. The previous slide just sort of gave you the list of topics or issues that are covered by the criteria. We wanted you to be able to wrap your head around, so what exactly do these criteria look like? And on slide 17, we give you an example. So under speed, F5, I spoke to, it's not just about speed of the transaction, but this visibility of status from end to end. This is an example of how this is currently drafted. It describes, it gives a high-level description of what is this criteria. It tries to elaborate on it by outlining some key considerations. And then each criteria, specifically for, this purpose of assessing different approaches, creates an effectiveness scale that will help to measure, is an approach effective as it relates to this criteria. Scales may vary. The scales for some criteria are very quantitative. Some, by nature of the criteria, they're more qualitative, so some variability there. But you can see the structure of the criteria with this example. I want to talk about sort of where, as I noted, we are at a point where the Faster Payments Task Force has a solid working draft of the criteria that they are on the cusp of being ready to release publicly on our website for any and all stakeholders to review and comment. And so in the next couple of weeks, we plan to publish the current working draft of that. In a minute, I'll talk about our webinar on Friday, which you got an invitation to, where we'll dig in and talk in more detail about this. But then importantly, we're inviting your feedback through a survey mechanism. We'll have some quick flash polling on Friday, but really an opportunity through a survey to provide, pretty robust feedback on, either there will be some key issues and questions that the task force is grappling with that we'll put up front sort of in the first piece of the survey. And then we'll provide the opportunity, if you want to weigh in on all 36 for you to tell us if you think we got it right, it needs more work, and to tell us how important that particular criteria is to you. So an important opportunity, and you'll be able to learn more on the website or through the webinar, which we describe on slide 18. So obviously, by virtue of the fact that you're here today, you're a member of one of our Federal Reserve communities, whether you're a customer, you're a member of our fedpaymentsimprovement.org subscriber community, or perhaps you have a relationship with one of the organizations on the task force who have done a good job of telling their membership and constituencies about the work that we're doing. But it will benefit you if you're not a registered member of our community to go to fedpaymentsimprovement.org to ensure that as this work develops and progresses and moves forward, you are always among the first to know what's happening. You'll get invitations to events like this. You'll get notices when we publish things like the criteria, and opportunities to attend events to provide input to complete surveys. I've highlighted the webinar. It's this Friday. It's how can you weigh in on the requirements for a faster payment system? And we're going to dig deeper on these criteria and specifically talk about a few of those key questions that the task force is actively debating, and they especially would like your input on. We specifically scheduled the webinar this Friday to do some flash polling and to get some gut reaction from you about some of these issues so we can bring that to the FASTER Task Force, which is meeting next week on Monday and Tuesday in Chicago. So if you haven't already registered, we'd love to have you on the webinar on Friday. As I noted, if you can't join Friday, or even if you can, once this criteria document, the working draft, is available in the next couple of weeks, we are going to post that out on fedpaymentsimprovement.org with some kind of background information, some context, and we'll have a link to the criteria survey. If you're a registered member on one of our lists, got the invitation today, you'll likely get pinged to say, hey, the criteria are available, and come take our survey. So that's how you can get involved. We would very much like you to stay engaged and to give us some input. With that, we are going to pause with a final polling question, and then we want to be sure to save a couple of minutes to answer any questions that you've submitted via the webinar tool.
All right, thank you, Connie. I have launched that polling question for our participants. I'll read that aloud. The question is, based on what you have learned in the webinar today, you plan to actively support task force efforts and encourage others to get involved, or you will actively follow work and provide input along the way, support pursuing a faster payments capability, but do not plan to actively follow this work, support pursuing a faster payments capability, but do not agree with the approach described, or you do not value or support pursuing a faster payments capability. So I'm going to just stall for a couple of seconds and remind our participants how they can ask a question. You can click the Ask Question button in the webinar, type your question right in, and we can queue that up for Connie. So hopefully that gave you enough time to think about your response, and I'm going to stop that polling question and show the results to the group. And just wait 1 second, those results will pop up. And it looks like 67% of your participants will actively follow work and provide input along the way. So Connie, I'll allow you to have some remarks on that.
Thanks, Jean. I suppose by virtue of asking folks like you who signed up and joined us for an hour today, we should have expected to be skewed toward the positive end of the spectrum and that you want to stay engaged. I'm thrilled to see the level of interest. I hope, you know, the 80, 90% of you who indicated you want to continue to stay involved will participate, especially in this criteria phase. and there will be many more opportunities along the way. So again, to ensure that you have that opportunity, if you have not registered, I would love for you to go out to fedpaymentsimprovement.org right this minute. You'll probably have 2 spare minutes to do that before you even have to get to your next meeting. So let me just ask Jean if we've had any questions come in that I can answer.
Perfect. In fact, Connie, we have had a couple of questions. I'll just start at the top. How is the Faster Payments initiatives from the Fed and TCH similar or different?
So back when I talked about the effectiveness criteria, I talked about the work of the task force to identify and evaluate approaches to faster payments. And I talked indirectly about all of this innovation and work going on in the market around faster payments. The Clearinghouse is one of those organizations, and there are many who also see the need for real-time and faster payments capability, and they are taking action to develop that kind of capability. So we're very supportive of those efforts going on in the marketplace, and they're going on in parallel to the work of the task force. The Clearinghouse is a member of the Faster Payments Task Force, and they are one of the organizations who has talked about the value of the task force work and the criteria specifically to supporting and informing the innovation that they are doing in the marketplace. So a lot of synergy. I think the work, the collaboration that we're doing as part of the task force is beneficial to all of those private sector efforts and initiatives, and we're really happy to have a lot of those innovators participating in the task force.
All right, thank you, Connie. The next question, is the Fed working with new entrants, for example, Dwolla, to explore newer approaches to money movement?
So you saw from the task force roster, Dwolla is also on the task force, on the steering committee, the Clearinghouse is on the steering committee, we've got Ripple, we've got some of the largest, long time leaders in the industry, folks like FIS and others on the task force. So a lot of diversity. So yes, we have people who are kind of operating an expert in today's payment systems and have reach and can help influence with many organizations a direction. We also have organizations like Dwolla and Ripple and Wingcash and others who are approaching these issues in new and innovative ways, and they're bringing those perspectives to the task force. So, the diversity, the 320 participants, can be challenging to have so many perspectives around the table, but I think even after 90 days, everyone involved would agree that it's creating a really rich process, and I think will contribute to much better outcomes.
Okay, thanks, Connie. We have a couple of more questions from our participants. The next question is, how would we go about getting registered for the 18th webinar 2?
So fedpaymentsimprovement.org. At the top in the navigation, we have an events tab. And if you go to that page, there will be a link and you can register there.
Great, thanks. Next question, is the industry generally satisfied with our speed for the launching and execution of the initiative?
I'm sorry, Jean, can you satisfied with our...
Oh, sure, let me just restate it. Is the industry generally satisfied with our speed for the launching and execution of the initiative?
Over the last couple of years, as we've been talking about this issue, we issued our consultation paper, we issued our paper in January. It's been a very common theme of feedback and discussion, this sense of urgency people have around moving forward around building and having these capabilities available. I talked about that driver, the concern, the anxiety about falling behind the rest of the world. There's anxiety even within the U.S. among different providers about, falling behind from an innovation standpoint. And so there is a sense of urgency. I think the folks on the task force, those 300 people, will tell you who have rolled up their sleeves and are doing a tremendous amount of work, would tell you that we are operating at a very aggressive speed on the task force work. And really moving as quickly as humanly possible. Some people would say it's inhumane, the pace at which we're moving. So I think we would all like this to be done. We'd love to reach that desired outcome tomorrow, sooner rather than later. But there is a real sense of urgency about the work.
Okay, thank you. Our next question. I am unable to participate on the task force, but would like to follow their work. What's the best way to do that?
So as I noted earlier, fedpaymentsimprovement.org, it's in the slide deck. That's our one-stop shop for all of the information and work around all of the initiatives I described for our 5 strategies that I described up front related to payment system improvement. And so number one thing, go there, subscribe. You will be kept informed and given lots of opportunities to participate as a member of our community.
Okay, thank you, Connie. We are 1 minute until the end of our session, but I do want to try to get one more question in. If you submitted a question and it was not answered, we'll be sure to get that to our presenters today. Connie, the next question. Who is driving the criteria development, the Fed or task force members?
So the Fed is administering, facilitating the task force work, and so we are, sometimes using task force input. In the criteria example, we had lots of discussion at that 2-day kickoff meeting in June, posing lots of questions to try and get enough information from the task force about what they thought they needed to be in the criteria that we could take pen to paper and then feed it back to them. And so we are holding the pen and taking their direction, their edits, their guidance. I talked about the version that we're about to release in the next couple of weeks for broad stakeholder comment. That isn't the first version. We've iterated, 3 times with the task force, had an in-person meeting. We've got another next week. We've had 3 calls. We've had segment calls, small working group calls. I talked about the legal work group we've stood up. We've got a security criteria work group. So we're supporting the work, by trying to do the heavy lifting of drafting and editing and revising and gathering input, but it's really reflective of the task force views. And again, back to that decision-making framework, that's where the rubber hits the road, and by virtue of the votes and the endorsement, we'll have a product that folks can truly say is a product of the task force.
All right, thanks so much, Connie. All right, well, we are 1 minute over, so I just want to know if you have any closing remarks before I officially close out our session today.
I just wanted to thank everyone on the call again for sharing your valuable time today. I hope you, learned more. We met your expectations. We're very open to feedback. Our website also has an opportunity where you can submit questions if you didn't get to ask them today, where you can share your thoughts, your suggestions, your feedback at any time. But we're excited about this important work and hope that you will stay engaged.
All right, thanks so much, Connie, and thank you for your time as well. This does conclude our webinar. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.